Apple yesterday unveiled its new iPhone 6s and 6s Plus smartphones, which CEO Tim Cook called the most advanced smartphones in the world. Katie Benner writes about Apple for the New York Times and joins us now. Hey, Katie, welcome back to Tech News Today.
Hey, it's great to be back. It's great to see you.
Great to have you on the show once again. Now, as you pointed out in your piece, the iPhone brings in 56% of Apple's profits. And yesterday on this show, I mentioned the fact that Apple's iPhone revenue, just the iPhone revenue alone, dwarfs the total revenue of every other major tech company in Silicon Valley. Now, what new features did Apple introduce to the iPhone that will enable them to keep raking in this kind of dough?
Sure, that's always the big question. So this time around, you've got what they are calling 3D touch technology. It's very similar to the sort of force touch that you saw on the watch or the trackpad of the new MacBooks, where basically the screen can feel how hard you're pressing, and depending on how hard you press and for how long you press, it brings up different menus and different features. This is something that I got to play with along with everybody else who was at the event yesterday. We all got to sort of play with the new phones, and it was really interesting how by using pressure, you could basically do the things that you can do on a keyboard on your laptop, like right-click, slide things back and forth. It was actually really great, and it's the sort of thing that's very tactile that should not only get people interested in using the new phone, but should allow developers to create all sorts of new apps that we can't even think of right now, but that will create make the device more rich and better utility for users. So 3D touch technology is their big thing, and then they have 4K video capacity, a much better camera, both front and back, and interestingly, they came up with their own payment plan. And the reason the payment plan is a big deal is because it allows people to go into Apple stores and get what they can already get at a lot of the cellular shops right now, which is you buy the plan on a lease, you buy the phone on a lease program. So for $30-something a month, you're able to not only buy a new iPhone, but to upgrade every single year and get free Apple Care protection. So that gives Apple a little bit more control over its relationship with us, the customers, which traditionally has been mediated by AT&T, T-Mobile, Verizon, et cetera.
And do you think that the new payment plan is going to make a really big difference? Do you think people are really going to be into it?
Well, I think that we've already seen people excited about the payment plans as they're offered through the mobile carriers. So people have decided that it's a good idea to basically lease a phone already. I think that being able to do that through Apple is a big deal for them. You know, they'll have that direct relationship with you and me if we choose to buy Apple phones. We'll get the free Apple Care program, which is fantastic. And they'll have a sense for what happens with the upgrade cycle. Like there have already been analysts talking about how the upgrade cycle is being sped up by what the carriers have done. It's encouraging us to buy phones more often, buy phones more frequently, and further commoditizing the phone. So Apple would want to be in charge of that.
Andy Anako yesterday during our live stream, I'm sorry, Zoya, to jump in there, but Andy Anako on our live stream yesterday made the point that he hates this because he likes the idea that every time a company like Apple comes out with a new phone, people will once again look anew at the whole market and say, which phone should I choose this time?
Right.
Instead of just like, I'm going to get every iPhone from now on, no matter what, from Apple. But I guess the bigger question is, what do the carriers like to think about this? This is a pretty aggressive move against Apple's carrier partners, isn't it?
Exactly. And it was really interesting at the event the other day. So Masa-san is CEO of SoftBank, of course, who's a big shareholder in Sprint. He was front row center at the event. He was clearly watching very carefully. There were Sprint executives there as well. And I think that it could do one of two things. Yes, you're right. It could totally disintermediate the carriers, which they wouldn't like at all. Or it will show that some of the carriers like the Sprints and T-Mobiles of the world that have already had special plans just for Apple will continue to have special plans just for Apple and that great working relationship with Apple. And it will put pressure on the Verizons and AT&Ts of the world to fall in line and to do special deals for Apple.
And what kind of price are we looking at here in terms of buying one of these phones up front versus the payment plan? Is it going to be much more expensive?
So it's the pricing is exactly what we've seen before with the contract. So if you go into your local Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile dealer today, and if you go into your local Verizon dealer today, probably not T-Mobile, and you do the 2-year contract, it's going to start at $200, and then they drop the price of every other phone by $100. So that will actually encourage people to, if nothing else, hopefully upgrade to the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus as it becomes more affordable on contract to get people into these new larger phones, which has been a huge, huge boost for Apple. Like that's been a really big deal for them.
Now, in the phone itself, of course, Apple announced a long list of features, and these include a new pink color. Oh, you're supposed to say rose gold, I guess, not
rose gold, you guys.
Not pink, but it's pink. And you know, they have a new 7,000 aluminum alloy, which is going to prevent a new bend gate. They have all kinds of everything's faster, so the processor's much faster, the graphics are much faster. Even the Touch ID sensor is twice as fast, they claimed. It has a great camera now, 12 megapixels. Apple claims to have cracked the code on how to have a 12 megapixel camera that doesn't have all kinds of noise in it. They said that that's a difficult challenge that they have overcome, and that's capable of recording 4K videos, which is really interesting. They have a long list of features, but the one that I want to zero in on is this live photos feature. Now, what they're doing is when you take a picture, the default behavior now with the Apple iPhone camera is that it will capture a little bit of video just before you press the shutter and just after. And so what that means is that it's constantly recording video when the camera app is open and dumping the video. So it's recording, dumping all the time. And when you get around to tapping on that thing, it retains what it recorded just before you press the button and then just after. And then you can put that on they demonstrated on a lock screen. So you have a static photo on the lock screen, but when you touch it with this 3D touch feature, I guess you touch it lightly, the photo comes alive momentarily and you get this Harry Potter sort of effect. Okay. Now it's always a risk with smartphones, as of course Amazon learned with the Fire Phone, which is now dead apparently. Things like this can be gimmicks that lead to ridicule and can be ignored by users, or they can become a differentiator and become a standard and something that thrills users. What's your take on this particular feature, Katie, on whether this will thrill or bore users?
I think that Apple's been really good at finding the small details that only they really care about that have delighted users in the past. I think this is probably going to be another one of them. Apple was really smart not to sell this as like the main reason why you would want to buy this phone. They didn't oversell it in that way. They really did present it during the event yesterday as something that they created because they just wanted to make something that was a little bit delightful and a little bit fun and pretty cool. And it does beautifully show off 3D touch. You know, you have to use that interface to make it happen. So it showcases 3D touch and also showcases the really extraordinary quality of both the camera and the video.
There were some elements that were announced that seem to be a pretty long way away from what Apple has done in the past. It seems like there's a degree of breaking the taboos, and I think you mentioned this in your article. What are they doing now that Steve Jobs would not have done?
Sure, I think this is also very smart of the company too. So Apple, when they introduced the new iPad Pro, the long rumored, much anticipated iPad Pro, bigger, better, created for the enterprise, they also introduced with it a stylus and a keyboard that's basically like the Microsoft Surface keyboard. Yeah. So in adding in those elements, they did one of two things. One, Steve Jobs said that if you're using a stylus, you're doing something wrong with your product. Like he was very anti-stylus. So creating the Apple Pencil, which is basically a stylus, was one thing that Jobs probably said he wouldn't do. And then by creating this keyboard as well, they're making sort of a converged device that could someday replace the MacBook, which is another thing they said they would not do. They weren't interested in making a converged device. Now, one of the things about Apple that I think people forget is that this company is not constrained by either the market's expectations of it or what executives have said in the past, right? People thought they would never make the bigger phone. They would make a phablet, but then they have the iPhone 6 Plus, and it's done extraordinarily well. So for Apple, defying convention and defying expectation has been really good for it. And I think that that's what we're seeing with the iPad Pro. Hopefully, we don't know yet what will happen or whether the market will embrace it, but they came out with this tablet. iPad sales have been in decline. People are not interested in using it. There's not like an obvious use case for the iPad that keeps consumers engaging with the device like we do with our phones. So they're going into a different market with the professional market. They showed things like CAD, which is for architects. They showed a bunch of Adobe programs, which are clearly aimed at, designers and people who have to lay out pages. These are professional uses. They showed medical uses. So they're going after a new market, and they're doing it by, maybe breaking from some of the earlier pronouncements of executives. And that's great.
And I think most of these things that you mentioned, the disparaging of things that Apple would later do. In fact, Steve Jobs said nobody reads anymore until Apple came out with iBooks, and suddenly people were reading again.
Exactly.
That was, I think, just part of Steve Jobs' approach to spin. He would disparage things that Apple wasn't directly doing, but as you mentioned, Apple does have an open mind. They do want to corner all these markets, and so that I think that can be dismissed as just Steve Jobs-iness, if you will.